Wyoming Territory, August 1879. The wind carved through the dry hills of Carbon County as the sun bled low across the horizon, painting everything gold and orange. Flames danced in a small cook-fire behind the weather-beaten sod house, and Francesca Ellard stood in the doorway with a rifle in her hands, her daughter pressed close to her side. The gang of outlaws had been circling since morning. Now they were just waiting. "They will come when the dark hides them," Francesca said quietly, not taking her eyes off the ridge. Olive, barely 11, clutched her mother's skirt but did not cry. She had not cried since her father was buried last spring. "Do they want the land, Mama?" she asked. "No. Just what they think they can take." Francesca had not meant for it to happen like this. She had come west with her husband, Thomas, chasing a promise of land near Rawlins and a new start after the war. He had been a good man, steady and kind with Olive. But the fever had taken him fast, and the claim had been left to her alone. She had held it, dug fence posts, mended the roof, and kept the garden alive through a dry summer. But word got around. A widow alone on 200 acres of grazing land was easy pickings. The gang showed up 2 days ago. 4 men. They had not harmed her yet, but they wanted her gone. They wanted the house, the land, and whatever else they thought she might offer under threat. One had even leaned in too close yesterday, smiling with black teeth. She had aimed the rifle square at his chest. "Try it," she had said. "Go on," he had laughed, but he had not touched her. Now the sky darkened. Francesca's hands were steady, but her heart pounded. She had 4 bullets left. "Go to the root cellar," she said to Olive. "Do not come out until I come for you." "But Mama, now." "Please." Olive ran, her boots kicking up dust. Francesca waited until the heavy door thudded shut, then stepped out onto the porch. She could hear horses now, soft hoofbeats. The kind that meant someone was trying not to be heard. She backed toward the side of the house, keeping the rifle up. Her breath short, her shoulders tight, then a voice rang out from the darkness. "Ma'am." It was not one of the men from the gang, it was deeper. Calmer, a little rough from dust and long days on the trail. Francesca froze. "Who is it?" she called. A figure stepped into the firelight. A man, tall in the saddle with a battered hat pulled low. His horse was lathered and tired, but he sat straight, a rifle slung behind him and a revolver at his hip. "Name's Merritt Shaw," he said. "Saw smoke, thought someone might need help." She did not lower her rifle. "You alone?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. Rode up from Medicine Bow." Past a couple men back near the creek looked like trouble. She studied him. He did not look like an outlaw, too clean cut. Worn, yes, his coat was torn and dusty, and he had the lean look of a man who had not eaten well in days, but his eyes were clear and sharp. Watchful. "You a lawman?" "No," he said. "Just a cowboy." She hesitated. "They're still out there, I figured. You expecting them tonight?" She nodded once. He dismounted and walked his horse to the fence post. It was a quiet, deliberate kind of movement. No sudden gestures, no signs of fear. He tied the reins, then came back toward her, hands open. "May I come closer?" he asked. She did not answer, but she did not stop him. He stepped into the ring of firelight, and she could see the lines on his face now and the faint scar under his cheekbone. He looked about 35, older than she was by a few years, but not so much it mattered. "You have a plan?" he asked. "I have 4 bullets," he nodded. "Not much of a plan." "No." He looked past her toward the hills where the brush moved in the wind. "You have a daughter?" "She is safe." He nodded again, as if that mattered most. "I will stay," he said simply. "If you will have me." She stared at him. "Why?" Merritt shrugged. "Seems wrong. 4 men trying to run a woman off her land. I do not take to that kind of thing." Francesca studied his face. She saw no lies in it, just the quiet steadiness of someone who had seen worse. She finally lowered the rifle. "You can sleep on the porch," she said. "If you make it through the night." He almost smiled at that. "Fair enough." They set up a second fire, smaller, hidden behind the shed. Merritt positioned himself between the house and the hills. He checked his rifle, then sat with his back to the wall, watching the dark. Francesca stood nearby, arms crossed. "You ever done this before?" she asked. "Watched over a house? Faced men like that?" Yes, she nodded and said nothing more. The night deepened. Crickets chirped. The wind shifted, then movement. Merritt stood fast. Francesca raised her rifle again. Shapes moved low through the brush. One man first, then two more. They are coming, she breathed. I see them. Suddenly, a shout, then a shot. Merritt pulled Francesca down behind the trough. Another shot rang out, splintering the edge of the porch. Stay low, he said. He moved fast. Sure-footed, he returned fire, one shot, then another. One man dropped, the others scattered. Go back, one of them yelled. She ain't worth it, another blast. Francesca saw Merritt move like he had done this 100 times, calm, sharp, measured, then silence. She waited, breath held. Merritt stood slowly, scanned the brush. They are gone. She stood too, heart hammering. You sure? They will not try again tonight. She looked at him in the firelight. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, a grazing wound already staining the cloth. You are hurt. It is nothing. She stepped closer, her rifle forgotten now. Let me look. He hesitated, then nodded. She guided him inside, past the cracked door and into the warm light of the hearth. She sat him down, took a cloth, and began cleaning the wound. You are lucky, she said. So are you. Their eyes met. You could have kept riding, she said. I know. Why didn't you? He paused, then looked at her in a way that made her chest tighten. Because no one should have to stand alone when the dark comes. She swallowed hard. Her hands trembled slightly where they touched his skin. Thank you, she whispered. He gently took her hand. His eyes never left hers. You are welcome, Francesca. The sound of her name in his voice made something shift inside her, not just relief, not just gratitude, something deeper. Something she thought she had buried with Thomas. Outside, the wind passed through the grass. Inside, something new had begun. Merritt woke with the first pale light of morning, the boards of the porch solid beneath his back, and the scent of warm earth rising with the dew. His shoulder throbbed dully, but it wasn't bad. He lay still for a moment, listening. Birds stirred softly in the cottonwoods along the creek bed. No hoofbeats, no voices. Only the hush that came after a long-held breath had been let go. He sat up slow, careful not to strain the torn muscle. A quilt had been laid over him during the night. He hadn't brought it out himself. Francesca stepped out a moment later, her hair pulled back loosely, a tin mug in each hand. Coffee, she said, offering one to him. It's bitter, water's low. He took it. Bitter's fine. They sat on the top step, the porch still cool under their boots. She didn't speak and he didn't press. The quiet between them wasn't strained, it held something steady, like a post driven deep in the ground. After a time, she said, they won't be gone far. No, they'll wait. Might bring more, she nodded once. I'll ride into Rawlins, he said. Tell the sheriff what's happened. If he's worth half his badge, he'll come look. She turned her head toward him, eyes sharp. You think they'll listen to a cowboy? I've worked cattle for the Ellison outfit down south. The sheriff's kin with them. He met her gaze. He'll listen. She took a slow sip. I'll need someone here while you're gone. I know. I can't leave Olive alone. You won't have to. She looked at him a moment longer, then rose. There's a boy up the ridge, Benjamin Calloway. His father was a friend of my husband's. I'll send Olive there. Merritt stood too, stretching his shoulder carefully. I'll head out soon as the horse is ready. She nodded, then turned inside without another word. He found Olive by the garden fence, watching a jackrabbit nose through the brush. She didn't look away when he approached. You're the man who came last night, she said. I am. You shot one of them. Yes, she studied him. You gonna stay? He knelt beside her, resting one hand on his knee. I'm going to town to fetch help, but I'll be back. She chewed her lip. They'll come back. I know. Her voice dropped low. Mama's tired. She pretends she's not, but I can tell. She's strong. She's alone. Merritt didn't answer. He reached out and gently tucked a stray hair behind her ear. She's not anymore. By the time the sun had cleared the ridge, he was saddled and riding hard east. Francesca watched him go from the doorway, her arms crossed against the wind. She didn't wave. He didn't turn. Olive had gone to the Calloway farm with a packed satchel and a quiet goodbye. Francesca had felt the loss deep in her spine, but she knew it was the right choice. Children needed safety. And safety was uncertain now. she spent the day moving slow but steady. She patched the split in the front door with strips of hide and hammered the shutters closed. She fed the chickens and split what wood remained. Every task was rooted in muscle and memory. She didn't allow herself to think past evening. By dusk, she'd set a fire low in the stove and moved a lantern near the window, shuttered just enough to keep the house from glowing like a signal. She kept the rifle cleaned and propped within reach. When darkness finally fell again, the wind rose with it. She sat at the kitchen table, one hand resting on the wood, the other around her cup. Unmoving, listening, footsteps outside, then a knock. She rose in one motion, rifle in hand, but a voice came through before she reached the door. "It's me." She opened it. Merritt stood in the lantern light, dust-caked and weary but upright. "You rode hard," she said. "Didn't stop." She stepped aside. He entered and she shut the door behind him. The sheriff, coming before dawn with 2 deputies. She let out a slow breath, a kind of unwinding. "There's more," he said. "The gangs hold up near the old stagecoach ruins west of here. Sheriff's been after them a while. He's glad to have a reason to move in." She poured a little water from the jug into a basin. "You're thirsty," he nodded, "and hungry." She pulled bread from a cloth, sliced it, and laid a bit of dried meat beside it. "It's not much. It's enough." They sat across from each other. He ate with the quiet focus of a man who hadn't had a meal since morning. She watched him, noting the lines that hadn't been there the night before. The way he moved slower now, more careful. "You didn't have to come back," she said. "I told Olive I would." She looked down at her hands. "You keep your word." "I try to," she said nothing for a long while. Then, "You ever stay in one place, not lately? You thinking of changing that?" His eyes met hers, dark, steady, unreadable for a moment. Then something shifted, a breath between them. "I might be," he said. The lantern flickered. The house creaked as it settled in the night. She rose and crossed to the hearth, setting another log on the fire. When she turned back, he was watching her, not with hunger, not with expectation, but with something quieter. "Do you miss it?" he asked. "Before all this, before Thomas died," he nodded. She leaned against the wall, arms folded. "I miss knowing what the next day might hold. I miss not having to guard every corner of the house." Merritt set his cup down. "You ever think about starting again?" "Somewhere else." She stepped closer, gaze steady on his. "I don't want to run. This land, it's mine. I dug into it with my bare hands, buried my husband here, raised my daughter. I won't leave it to men like that." He didn't look away. "Then I'll help you keep it." Her voice dropped. "Why?" "Because you shouldn't have to stand alone." She stood very still. Then slowly she reached out and rested her hand lightly on his arm. It was the first time she'd touched anyone without fear in many months. The warmth of it lingered. "You can sleep inside," she said. "If you want, I'd like that." She stepped aside as he moved toward the back room. Just before he passed her, he paused. "I'll take the floor, I know." They didn't say goodnight. They didn't need to. The house was quiet again, but it no longer felt hollow. Outside, the wind shifted west. Inside, the fire burned low and steady. The sheriff and his 2 deputies arrived in the gray light before dawn, their horses winded and their faces set with the practiced calm of men who'd ridden into worse. Francesca stepped outside to meet them, boots crunching over dry ground, rifle slung carefully out of sight. Merritt stood beside her, arms loose at his sides. Sheriff Broderick was older than she expected, with a long jaw and a bristled mustache that moved only when he spoke. He tipped his hat as he dismounted. "Mrs. Ellard, Mr. Shaw says you've had some trouble." She nodded. 3 men left, one's dead. They came twice. I expect they'll try again." Broderick turned to his youngest deputy, a boy no older than 20 with a pale scar under his eye. "Jonas, ride south. Circle the ridge. If you see sign, don't engage, just report back." The boy nodded and rode off without a word. The other deputy, a thick-shouldered man named Kellem, stepped forward and gestured toward the house. "Anyone else inside?" "No," Francesca said. "My daughter's staying with the Callaways." Broderick gave a short nod. "We'll set up here for a few hours, long enough to draw them out." She didn't ask what would happen after. She already knew by late morning the wind had quieted and the land held still, as if waiting. Merritt helped Broderick and Kellam move into position behind the fence line, then returned to the house where Francesca had begun setting out a cold midday meal. "You should eat," she said, laying down a strip of cheese beside a cut apple. He took the plate, nodding his thanks. They sat by the open window, listening to the slow creak of branches and the sharp call of a hawk overhead. "I saw your stitching," she said, glancing at his shoulder. "It held." He looked down at the faded thread. "Had a grandmother who taught me. Said a man ought to be able to patch himself if he planned on surviving alone." Francesca tilted her head slightly. "You still plan on that? Used to think it was easier." "Is it?" No, she didn't press, but her gaze lingered. She set her fork down and rested her elbows on the table, fingers laced. "When Thomas died, I thought I'd have to disappear to keep what was his. I thought the only way to make it was to act like I didn't feel anything." Merritt looked at her then, his expression unreadable. "What changed? This place, the silence got too loud." He nodded slowly. "I've known that kind. They fell quiet again, but it wasn't hollow. It carried something shared now, something understood." By early afternoon, a crow flew low over the ridge, cutting a wide arc before vanishing into the trees. Kellam stood from behind the fence and motioned sharply. "They're coming," he said. Francesca stood and reached for her rifle, but Merritt stepped in front of her. "You stay with Broderick." "I'll take the east side. I can handle myself, I know, but if they get past us, the sheriff'll need someone steady with him." She hesitated, then gave a short nod. "Don't let yourself get surrounded." "I won't." He slipped out the back, moving low through the grass. Francesca followed the sheriff to the side of the barn, crouching behind a rusted plow. Her heart was steady, but her hand gripped the rifle tight. The first rider came into view just after the sun tipped west. Francesca recognized him, the youngest of the three. His arm was wrapped in a blood-stained sling. Two others followed, flanking him. One of them had traded his coat for a cavalry vest, and the other rode with his hat pulled low, a shotgun balanced across his lap. The sheriff waited until they were within shouting distance. "You boys are trespassing," he called out. The lead man reined in. "We didn't come for talk." "Then you'll leave with bullets in your backs." Francesca raised her rifle, sighted the one on the left. The man with the shotgun raised it, but a crack split the air before he could aim. He fell sideways off his horse. Merritt had fired from the east ridge, the horses reared and the gang scattered. Kellam stepped out from the brush, firing once, then twice. The man in the cavalry vest went down hard. The last rider kicked his horse into a gallop, trying to flee south, but Jonas rode out from the trees like a ghost, swinging a lasso wide. The rope caught true and the man tumbled, his face hitting dirt. It was over in less than a minute. Francesca stood slowly, her hands still tight around the rifle. Broderick lowered his own and exhaled through his nose. "Guess that settles it." She walked down to where Merritt stood by the fence, his rifle slung across his back, his breath measured. "You all right?" she asked. He gave a short nod. "I'm tired." He reached out and brushed a bit of dust from her sleeve. "You don't have to be." They stood like that for a moment, the sun warm on their faces, the wind stirring the grass. Then Merritt stepped closer. "I wasn't sure if I'd stay," he said. She looked at him. "And now, I'd like to build something, if you'll have me here." Francesca didn't answer right away. She reached up and touched the collar of his shirt, fingers brushing the edge of the old stitching. "You'll need better thread," she said. He smiled, eyes soft. "You offering to teach me?" "I'm offering more than that." Merritt Shaw. They stood together as the deputies gathered the horses and Broderick gave orders for the bodies. The land was quiet again, but it no longer felt alone. That night, Olive came home. Francesca held her long at the doorstep, then stepped aside so she could see Merritt leaning against the porch rail. He nodded at her. "You all right, Olive?" She looked between them, then gave a small, knowing shrug. "I guess you'll be staying." Merritt glanced at Francesca, then back to the girl. "If your mama lets me." Francesca took his hand in hers and held it firm. Her voice was quiet but sure. She will. 3 weeks passed before the sheriff sent word that the last of the gang had been taken into custody near the Sweetwater River. Francesca read the letter by lamplight, her thumb pressed into the crease of the page, the oil flame casting long shadows against the wall. She didn't smile, but her shoulders settled lower, and her eyes lingered on the ink just a little longer than they needed to. Outside, Merritt was sanding the edge of a new window frame. He worked slow, methodical, the sleeves of his shirt rolled up to his elbows, sawdust clinging to his arms. Olive sat on the split log beside him, whittling a stick down to a point. "You ever build a whole house?" she asked. "No," Merritt said without looking up, "but I've fixed more than a few." "Is it harder than breaking horses? Different kind of work. One's muscle, the other's patience," she nodded, considering. "Mama says you're patient. She say that today, yesterday." "Well, I'll take it while it lasts." Francesca stepped out onto the porch and handed Merritt the folded letter. He wiped his hands on his trousers before taking it, scanning the sheriff's words without speaking. When he finished, he passed it back. "That mean you'll sleep easier now?" he asked her. "I won't sleep with the rifle across my lap." "That's something." He watched her for a moment, the way the breeze moved the edge of her skirt, the way her eyes tracked the sky like she was measuring the weight of it. "You still think about leaving?" "I thought about it every day until you came." She turned toward the garden. The rows were better now, clean, straight, with fewer weeds. Olive had taken to watering it each morning before the sun got too high. Francesca walked to the edge of the field and knelt, running her fingers along a young squash vine. "You ever think about planting something and staying to watch it grow?" she asked without looking up. "I do now." She stood and brushed the dirt from her palms. "Then we'd best get to planning." That evening, Merritt brought the horses in early. He'd taken to riding the perimeter each afternoon, not out of worry anymore, but habit. The land settled easier under his boots now, the silence no longer biting. Inside, Francesca was mending Olive's Sunday dress. The girl sat on the floor reading from a worn geography book, her feet tucked beneath her. "You've got a mind for maps," Merritt said, hanging his hat by the door. "I like knowing where I am," Olive said, "and where I'm not." Francesca glanced up. "She wants to see the ocean someday." "Which one?" Merritt asked. "Doesn't matter," Olive said. "Just water all the way to the sky," he nodded, thoughtful. "That's a good thing to want." Francesca set the needle aside and folded the dress across her lap. "You ever seen it?" "Once. In Galveston. Wasn't blue like I imagined, more gray, windy, still worth seeing, always." Later, after Olive had gone to bed, Merritt stepped out to the front steps. Francesca followed, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. The moon was low, soft gold. The air smelled of dry sage and something sweeter, wild clover maybe, pushed up through the earth after the last rain. "You're quiet tonight," she said. "I've been thinking." She waited, her gaze on the horizon. "I never planned on anything lasting," he said. "Not because I didn't want it. Just didn't figure it was mine to have." She looked over at him. "And now," he turned to meet her eyes, "now I want to build something that doesn't ride off when the weather changes." Francesca stepped closer, her hands still wrapped in the shawl, but her body open and unguarded. "Then stay," she said. "Not for the land or the work or even for her. Stay for me." He reached out slowly, gently, and rested his hand against her cheek. "I will," he said, and when she leaned in, it wasn't desperate or sudden. It was quiet and certain, like the first warm breeze at the end of a long winter. He kissed her like he'd meant to do it for weeks, and she kissed him like she'd finally found the place she'd been holding out for. When the wind shifted, they didn't move. They just stood there, her head against his shoulder, the porch boards beneath them solid and sure. Inside, the lamp burned low, and the house was full of breath and warmth and something that would carry them into the next season and the one after that. The first frost came early that year. It crept in overnight, turning the loose soil pale and crisp beneath the morning sun. Francesca pulled her shawl tighter as she hung the last of the linens on the line, the cloth stiff under her fingers. From the barn, the low hum of Merritt's voice carried not singing, quite, but something close to it, quiet and rough-edged, like he was speaking to the horses in a language they understood better than men. She stood still a moment and listened. It had only been a month since the trouble ended, but already the land held different weight. The fence line stood straighter. The barn roof no longer leaked, and the quiet, though still there, didn't feel so sharp now. Merritt stepped out of the barn, sleeves rolled, carrying a saddle blanket folded under one arm. "Snow won't be far," he said, glancing at the sky. She nodded. "We'll need to bring the last of the squash in. I'll take care of it after breakfast." She reached for the basket at her feet. "I'll start flour for the winter. Mill's still selling rye. I've some coin saved. We'll ride down Saturday." Francesca stepped close, brushing hay from his shoulder. "You still thinking of heading south when spring comes?" I'm not now." She looked at him, steady. "You sure?" "I've moved enough, built enough fences for other men. Feels right staying put for once." She nodded once and didn't press further. Instead, she handed him the basket and they walked back toward the house side by side. Inside, Olive sat at the table with a slate in front of her, scratching numbers in neat rows. Her brow furrowed, tongue pressed to the corner of her mouth. Merritt leaned over her shoulder. "You checking the grain counts?" "No," she said. "I'm figuring how many shingles we'll need for the shed roof." He raised an eyebrow. "That's so?" "I watched you measure the pitch last week," I remembered. Francesca set the kettle on the stove. She's always had a memory for shapes. Olive looked up. "Mama says I'm stubborn like Papa was." Merritt sat beside her. "You'll need that if you're going to build anything that lasts." She looked at him a moment, then went back to her slate, her jaw set with quiet purpose. That afternoon, Francesca walked the ridge behind the house where Thomas had been buried. The marker was simple, the stone worn smooth by wind and time. She knelt beside it, fingers tracing the edge. "I kept it," she said softly. "The land, the girl. I did what we set out to do." The breeze stirred the dried grass. She closed her eyes. "I think you'd have liked him. He's kind, and he doesn't try to fix what isn't broken." Footsteps behind her didn't startle her. Merritt knelt beside her, hat in hand. He didn't speak, just rested one hand on her back. "I needed to say it," she said. "I know." They stayed like that a while, the sky turning deep blue above them, the air still and full of the kind of peace that didn't need words. That night, they brought the last of the squash inside, set the shutters against the wind, and lit the lamp early. The house had taken on the smell of cinnamon and old wood, and the kitchen was warm. Merritt stood at the hearth, hands braced on either side of the mantel. Francesca came up behind him, resting her chin between his shoulder blades. "I've been thinking," she said. He turned, eyes curious. "If we're really staying, the back room could use a proper wall, and we'll need a second bed come spring. She's growing too fast." He nodded slowly. "I'll draw up the plans." She reached for his hand and held it between hers. "I want to marry you, Merritt." His breath caught just for a moment. "I didn't know if you wanted that." "I didn't know either. But I do now. I haven't got much to offer. You've got everything that matters." He kissed her, slow and sure, his hands on either side of her face like she was something precious. And when she kissed him back, it felt like something final and full, not an ending, but a settling. Like a place to rest after the long ride. They married in November, in the Calloway's parlor, with Olive standing between them in her best dress. The snow had started to fall just that morning, soft and light, and by afternoon it blanketed the fields in silence. Francesca wore her hair braided back with a sprig of dried sage tucked into the pin. Merritt wore the same coat he'd arrived in, mended twice now, and still holding strong at the seams. Afterward, they rode home together in the wagon, Olive nestled between them, wrapped in the quilt Francesca had sewn for her first winter on the land. The road was quiet, the kind of quiet that made room for everything else: the creak of the wheels, the breath of the horses, the press of their shoulders side by side. The house glowed ahead of them, smoke curling from the chimney. Merritt reached for Francesca's hand. "You cold?" he asked. She shook her head, smiling. "Not anymore." The snow kept falling, slow and steady. And inside, the fire burned warm and the three of them sat close, their lives stitched together not by grand declarations, but by the small, steady acts that made a home. And that was how the winter came, not harsh, not hollow, but filled.